Synopsis, a series of conversations with composers run in the framework of ACMC Institute. I'm Neža Zupanc and my guest today is Ralph Lewis. Welcome, and please a couple of words of introduction.
Sure. My name is Dr. Ralph Lewis. I often work as a composer. I'm also often involved teaching music theory and involved doing research along those lines. I guess a lot of my passion lies at the intersections of creativity, community, experimentalism, and so on, but generally in those spaces.
May I start with asking, how did you start composing?
Sure. And so this is one of those questions where you can think of maybe 4 or 5 on-ramps to when you started composing or started being creative and so on. I think that maybe one of those moments is I was aware when I was younger that my local high school had a composers concert each year, and I'd been to that concert as someone that wasn't attending that school that was younger, and so I became aware that this was going to be something at that school. So the summer before that, for whatever reason, I got it in my head that I'd better start composing and show up and be ready. So I showed up with a bunch of things I'd worked on all summer, realized no one else had been doing that, and away we go.
And is there a primary instrument that you are versed in?
So I started on viola, and I've kind of moved between instruments. I'd loved at the time taking harp lessons at University of Illinois with Noel Wan, and that was a really special time. And also with Molly O'Rourke too. I should mention both my harp teachers if I'm going to say one, right? But no, let's see. I've kind of moved between those. Double bass was really important to me for a long time. And I guess I'm more sort of, when I am performing, it'll typically be with violin or with small electronics at this point.
So how many instruments in total do you know how to play?
I mean, I'm not going to profess mastery of really any, but I've moved through maybe 7 or 8. It's the product of, the story goes like this. I'm playing viola, and I get it in my head that, why didn't I join the school jazz band? And so for about a year in 6th grade, I'm just wearing down that poor band teacher, Dr. Steve Payson, back on Long Island. Can viola be in the jazz band? Can viola be in the jazz band? He eventually says yes, as long as I transpose the parts myself. So, yeah. And so I took on that challenge. I figured out how to do that with support from him and my viola teacher, Jim Yule. And yeah, so I played viola in the jazz band, and gradually I realized that they weren't going to have a bass player in the coming year. So I decided to learn bass that summer.
Great.
So yeah. You see how there's all those little creative on-ramps? You're like, what if, what if we try something in this space? Can someone be involved? Can I be involved, et cetera, et cetera? And, thankfully, having supportive spaces, people like Steve Payson who said, why not? If you can do the work, why not? I love that.
Certainly. And now, fast forward to now, you are working at the Millikin College, also
At Millikin University.
University,
Yeah.
also teaching. Perhaps a quick stop at your own PhD. case, could you speak? The main subject of this conversation is compositional practice, and perhaps one aspect of it would be if you can address what you worked on, or maybe you're still working in your PhD thesis.
Oh, sure. So I have my doctorate. It's a DMA. It's in music composition, and I'm also happy to talk about the actual like teaching of composition in a bit, both at Millikin and also with my free to the public program called All Score Urbana that I've been doing for 8 years. So I'd be very happy to talk about that too. Um, and so at University of Illinois, where I got my doctorate, it is not a portfolio-based final project. It is a research-based project. And so I entered having a really uh, gut sense that I wanted to work on a project that I really cared about, that really spoke to, even if it's not my core sensibilities, my maybe core questions and so on. And so even then, I was feeling very strongly that I wanted to do something around the music of Aaron Cassidy. And so I embarked on this project after getting through all the coursework. I found an external grant so I could make it over to Huddersfield in 2019. That's actually where I met Dre, and that's how I found out about all of y'all through that. Um, and so I got to be over there for 3 weeks, and Aaron was an absolute delight. He let me look at all the sketches of Second String Quartet, which was the focus of my project, as well as interview him. Line upon line percussion was in town. That's why I scheduled that visit then, so we could see the revised premiere of that new piece, and also just get a sense of what it's like to work with Aaron and so on. That was such a treat, and so the resulting project, it's available publicly. You can download the PDF. It's available through the UIUC Ideals website and also on my website. But it's sort of trying to figure out how to communicate about music by Aaron and music like Aaron's, where people are sometimes unclear about what's actually inside of the actual music in terms of like how do I deal with the structure of it and so on, and how do I get past the sort of promotional aspects of the notation is very, very cool, you know. And then also, how does a performer engage with this and not feel overwhelmed? So as part of it, I was interviewing people like Catherine Schulmeister and Weston Olenke and members of Jack Quartet that had premiered the work, and they provided different insights on how to actually get in there and maybe start working with Aaron's music and so on. And so this was a research project, and it took me a couple of years to do. I had to do it throughout the pandemic. I was in different states doing it, the whole thing. And I was very happy to be able to present about that work in several conferences afterwards and get to talk with folks about it, because I think Aaron's music is exquisite. And I guess a trend, I guess we can talk about during our conversation today and hopefully afterwards too, is the idea of experimentalism being something that is maybe not ever flowering, but something that is moving forward. That is not simply a historical practice. That we in the U.S. there's sometimes this cul-de-sac of experimental music, which is, you know, the folks from New York, John Cage, Christian Wolff, Morton Feldman, Earl Brown, you know, and then people go, well, it's not that, so it's not. It's sort of that champagne joke. It's not It's not champagne. It's not from the Champagne region. It's sparkling creative music. I don't know, but the idea of learning about and loving the different ways people are creative, experimental, curious is something I think is a through line for me, for my own practice, and also as I research and talk about other people's practices.
And is experimentalism also a part, or do you consider it a part of your own compositional practice?
I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah, maybe we can now move there. Actually, what?
Sure.
How do you see your own how do you conceive of compositional practice, and perhaps what are the cardinal areas of it, the aspects that you consider essential?
Sure. And I guess just for clarity's sake, I'll talk about the outcomes of of it. I can talk about process too, but in terms of the actual pieces or the experiences coming from the completed works, there's often an intersection between being really curious about things beyond a focus on pitch and rhythm. I'm really interested in timbre, and then on the flip side, the hyperspecificity and the playfulness that can come out of that of microtonality is something I'm interested in. I'm not really interested in the microtonal police version of microtonality, but I like the building different settings and trying with your best performer's effort to attempt things, that side of things. There's varying degrees of engaging with spaces, but especially with working with audiences in different ways. I have a series of works that I need to get back to where I use YouTube as an instrument, and it's something you can play as a solo piece by yourself at home on your computer, but also something that you can do pretty much en masse with folks in an auditorium, in a classroom, in a computer lab. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes for someone to figure out how to play it, and we just go for it. It's been that series has been a lot of fun, and it's really been exciting to see people with different levels of experience jump into something that is an indeterminate work, and also something that they can that ideally they can take home and play with more. I think of it as sort of a goodie bag piece. I don't know if you've heard about, if you've talked in English about goodie bags, like at birthday parties, but we had a nice time, and I'll maybe at home I'll try something else with that. So I like that kind of additional resonance.
And in terms of microtonality or any of these aspects, could you perhaps elaborate more on specific compositions? What is happening with those?
Oh, sure. And so that series I just mentioned, the first one in that series is called Duotube. The actual instrument, you can find it on Robin Makeson's YouTube channel. She's a flutist and YouTube personality and a really great friend. And I developed it for her channel way before the pandemic hit and everyone was doing the live, performances online. And I was trying to find a way to support Robin's idea of her YouTube channel being something that wasn't just an archive, but was something that could be more live and performative in some way. So that one lives there. There's a sequel piece called MOXtube that Beth Stimpert from Alarmable Sound and from Central Missouri University, she commissioned the sequel piece called MOXtube, and so that one lives there too. There are more coming. I just had to do the whole getting a doctorate thing, so it's been a bit of a pause on that. I guess in terms of some other pieces, I have a piece called "Can't Take You Anywhere" for cello and electronics, and that piece is sort of kept on getting programmed throughout the years. Freya just played it at the Australasian Computer Music Conference in Sydney. This is going to be played in Chicago again in a couple months. It's kind of been going. I mean, I love that piece, and and I love sharing it with folks. That's on more of the considering the choreographic and physicality side of things. I sort of push against. I guess I generally kind of operate in sort of these poles of really focusing on sensitive microtonal information, or really focusing on these not necessarily aggressive but very physically challenging works. So sometimes they flow together. There's usually a microtonal element in them, but there's those tend to be sort of areas my work finds itself in, or as a third spot to just break to break the metaphor. These pieces that are deliberately designed to welcome folks with different levels of performance skills and connection with music history and all that, to welcome to the space and let them try things out. So, sort of moving between those areas.
Why do you think it's important to do so? If I may assume, you do think that, and this is one of the reasons you integrate that into your composition.
Oh, to that last thing.
To invite, to invite people into these spaces and have them try, like the YouTube composition, where it's
Sure.
also about, it's also about, in a way, inviting someone to try and play the instrument.
Sure. I guess there's a number of reasons I could bring to bear with that. One is that um, as much as there's still absolutely a space for the expert in the field, the idea of getting to share music, I think, is one of the underlying things I think inherent to music making. Secondly, I find that there is a lot of mythos, a lot of lore people build up around the problems, inaccessibility, and ugliness of a lot of contemporary music that is now over 100 years old. The fact that people still point at Schoenberg as being new and ugly, is, I think, it's totally that's one of the examples right there. It's like, have you heard this Webern guy? And it's like, it's like Webern died before the Marshall Plan happened. Um, so the idea of finding ways to be ourselves and try things out and discover different practices. It doesn't mean that every performance goes perfectly. I've had I had a funny instance at the beginning of this year where I had a piece where I was pretty clear about, let's the performers are doing this thing, but someone thought it was a everyone jumps in piece, and they chose some very funny noises to include. I did not appreciate that, but if it had been a piece that had been everyone can jump in, that would have been pretty cool. But finding different ways to, I guess, give people um, I guess, some sort of a basic sense of clarity of purpose, or a sense of how you could join in, is sort of, I guess, part of it. With All Score Urbana, the engagement program that I do, right? The ethos there is kind of similar, where people can drop in. You can plan to come, but you can just come and work with us. And part of it is we have collaborators on site to work with you. So, for example, Briar Darling, who'll be playing the cello solo I mentioned in Chicago in a few months, has been a wonderful part of that. Brent Roberts on percussion, Peter Tiarina, who's a jazz trombonist, Kareth Livengood, who's a flutist and composer. And this time around, because we had to have a different kind of twist with the grant writing, Jacob Mark Hentz, who's a choreographer dancer. And so it's been this lovely process, and we're hoping to do a concert with that in sometime, maybe like April. But it's the idea that you can have a plan, but sometimes getting a chance to try things out without having to feel super exposed. Um, for example, with DuoTube, it's it's just the YouTube channel that it's just the website that you would typically go to. There's no fancy software. It's what you could do right now. We could open the browser right now if we really wanted to play it. We're not, but um, in parallel with a lot of the similar ideas have come into the radio art that I've done throughout the years. I love radio art. That's another big passion of mine. And one piece is called Drive to the Edge,
Hmm.
where you're broadcasting this fixed media score from whatever the radio station is. This has been done throughout the U.S. and Radiophrenia Glasgow, who I love. They presented it a few years ago, and the idea is it also gives instructions, and as you, the driver, are driving, you're manipulating the signal in different ways. Safely, of course, behind the wheel,
Hmm.
but you're looking for that strange place under that bridge, on that side street, and so on, and trying to engage with that. So whether it's notes, whether it's pressing buttons and doing the sort of pseudo sampler things with duotube, or whether it's even just driving the car, these maybe not even always every day, but these uh, low ask participatory things, I think, can be so valuable. And ideally, it welcomes people to looking at other people's work, trying things out, and maybe also starts kind of poking more at the whole intentionality game that people play, where they say, my child could do that. Sure, but your child's having a lot of fun, you know.
Yeah, and
And they
in
just
my
made something
experience,
beautiful.
these insights also, yeah, maybe you've already mentioned it, afford sometimes um, more recognition when into how it's done, and via that into the structure of
Hmm.
the piece, and um, being through that helpful with what I, I think you mentioned accessibility of contemporary music today, or music from the last 100 years as well. Um,
Yeah, I guess, like, to put it in a little nutshell,
yeah.
the way that I try to think about it is the music can be hard, but the conversation about it doesn't have to be.
Hmm.
That's how I feel about it. The idea is that put the music you want to put on that concert, really go for it, and then we'll have a nice talk back afterwards. With some of the people I mentioned earlier, with Brant Roberts and Kareth Livengood and other folks like Mark Enslin, we've been doing this concert series called Turnaround with this kind of approach, where we'll do a mixture of improvisation, new compositions, some kind of not historical, but some older contemporary work that was done by, I don't know if you've heard about Herbert Brune, but he lived here in Urbana for quite some time, and so there's a bunch of great graphic scores, some early seminal electronic music, and so on. And so a mixture of all of that. So we'll present that at a few house concerts throughout the year, and then often we'll have talkbacks afterwards.
And what are usually the responses?
Um, so in that case, in general, people have generally been interested overall. Uh, there was a funny instance where last minute, uh, of the four people that were programmed on there, the host at the time, who is a woman, had to take herself off the concert because she was feeling sick. And then a talkback was like, "We're in this woman's house, but this is all male composers." And then, unfortunately, that woman, who I love, she didn't say, "Hey, I was on this concert," until literally like 48 hours before. I just got sick and didn't want to do it. So there was a bit of an extra loop of a conversation there. But eventually, there were really good things that came out of that, and we were able to, take it as a lesson, but also as a reminder that, maybe we don't have to reprint the program if, that person bails. So, yeah.
And
Um,
yeah, sorry. please.
Sure. There was also some kind of hilarious responses that there was this one man who wanted to give a thing by thing by thing, like almost like angry haiku response to every piece on the show. Um, and uh, when it came to my piece, there was a piece where it's a sax and percussion duo, and in it we're using the resonators from the electric toothbrushes on things, and he just was like, the whole time I was just like, just hit the drum, just hit the drum with it, just hit the drum, and the whole piece is about not hitting the drum. So,
I
it
saw
was
that.
really lovely
Yeah.
to actually catch that. Um, yeah, no, that was lovely. People seem to have enjoyed the works by Brune quite a bit, um, and in adding, we've been looking for increasing ways to engage with the public with that series with Turnaround. So, for example,
So
we did
this
a live.
turnaround series is a part of the Free for Public program that you are running.
It's actually it's two things. I might, for grant purposes, have to put them together. So All Square Urbana is me leading things. Turnaround is sort of a immersion, kind of a collectivy thing
Uh-huh.
that involves some of the same folks in town. So there is
Overlap.
but inherently, Turnaround is Brant Roberts, the percussionist, Kareth Livengood, composer, flutist, Mark Enslin, composer, bassoonist, uh, theater maker, and so on. Past folks who have worked with us on this are Matthew Miller, who is a vibraphonist and jazz specialist, and Susan Parenti, who's a composer and likes working with puppets. And
Uh-huh.
yeah, and so that used to be hosted in the actual Brune House in town, and we've been doing things in a more public-facing way. We did a few festivals, and we're plotting a James Tenney concert in a few months, hopefully.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so these are both the how was the name Oscar?
All
All
score.
all
Yeah,
score.
yeah.
Pardon, I
Oh,
just
no problem. No, no,
all
no problem.
score and turnaround are both different programs,
Yeah.
but both some sort of free for public to come and participate in making in performance.
Essentially. So, all score is to help folks create projects. So the idea is you come in and maybe you've been kicking around this song idea, or you'd like to try writing for trombone, or you have questions about how to maybe do jazz harmony things, or
Mm.
maybe you want to, having Jacob, who's the choreographer dancer involved, we had a lot of folks who dropped in and had questions about how to work with dance, how to work with a choreographer, which was lovely. It was really great to see him. And Brant, who's involved, he's a percussionist, but he does a lot of dance accompaniment. So it's great to have him in that conversation too.
Mhm.
Separately, Turnaround just started in the last year and change.
Mhm.
And it started with discovering this beautiful home that is called the Herbert Brune House, and uh, it, there'd been a history of house concerts there before the pandemic, and they were hoping to do more shows there. And so Susan and Brant and I started talking about it. Mark came and helped fill things out. Brant brought in Matthew because because they're duo partners, and eventually a few concerts, and we brought in Kareth, who had previously been our guest artist, and then she became part of the crew.
Mhm.
And that's sort of but it's just been really great to do something that's not centered strictly on composition, that is inherently open to different means of creativity. In that space, it's more of a concert series, but some pieces have have a lot more openness to participation. For example, we did in C to try to bring in everybody way back in, what was it, maybe April, something like that. Um, and the idea was to bring in as many folks who'd be willing to come join us and play on that, and so on. So there's sort of been an accordion depending on what the pieces are. Sometimes they're extremely intimate. Sometimes they're, and I love the multi-generational quality of it. Mark Enslin, who is just absolutely one of the most fabulous people ever, just the most interesting, super great person, had this amazing and super comical yet politically charged percussion solo that's super theatrical, and it was wonderful. That
And
one's called Sonata Quijada.
speaking of composition, what do you conceive to be uh, the strictly compositional, and after that everything else, or how do you conceive of this?
I guess it's ultimately, I'm really open to very flexible definitions. Just like with the your training in the U.S., wherever you go, it's a different definition. But um, for me, I guess I'm thinking about it in terms of the motivation of somebody. Does someone want to drive the metaphorical bus and create something? And in creating that, do they want some element of it being maybe fixed or planned or remembered or something like that, somewhere in that domain? Uh, and I am fine with the idea of improvisation living in that same space and operating many of the same roles. I frankly I see improvisation as one of the really like happy blessings of especially the last maybe 70 years, especially with how people were thinking it would be impossible to do. There's this archival recording I once heard back at Oberlin where Aaron Copland, I believe I'm getting this right. It is a while ago, but I believe I think it's Aaron Copland trying to explain that like improvisation outside of like a jazz medium would be impossible.
Come again?
That
Improvisation.
improvisation outside of like jazz, like to do like a new music improvisation would effectively be impossible. I'm very much truncating it, but effectively it was a no one's going to be able to do it. Don't bother, you
Hmm.
know. And the fact that people have engaged and built practices and been curious and so on, it has been just a beautiful thing. So the idea of showing up to let's say turn around, and I've worked really hard on a piece. I spent all those months notating and planning, and Matthew, the vibraphonist, has built this piece about in this case, it's a briefly the most modest structured piece, and then a group improvisation, you know, and the idea of just existing on the same show and being totally happy with it and just loving each other's work, and so on. Yeah.
Is improvisation also if there was so the practice part of the composition, is this also something you consider uh, part of your compositional practice, improvisation? And if
Yeah,
yes or yeah.
yeah, no, I think there's definitely spaces for that. I think piece to piece, it does change. I find that performer input along the way is super valuable, both for myself and when I'm working with people with all score, or when I'm working with folks over at Millikin University. The idea of valuing the expertise and the artistry that folks bring to your work is very valuable. If I recall, you operate as a composer and a flutist, right?
Yes, yes.
And so, depending on what hat you're wearing, I'm sure that you bring different things to the rehearsal energy. And there's probably a moment in your experience where you just knew that flute part better than the composer in some dimension, and you're able to suggest something to elevate it, you know,
It's
and
possible,
and
yes.
and and to value that rather than say, no, 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 I'm the artist, I bought the beret, I'm the artist, leave me alone, you know,
Certainly, yeah.
is definitely something on my mind quite a bit. But in terms of improvisation, yeah, I'll find whether it's me working with maybe software I've been dealing with. When I was developing, um, yeah, when I was developing that cello solo,
Hmm.
it uses this light triggered crackle box as a sound source that I
Hmm.
built in a workshop run by Travis Thatcher. Um, and I've since gotten a grant to get a bunch of them to bring to all scores. And now everyone gets to play with them, which is.
Hmm. Hmm.
But when I was using one of those flashlight apps on my phone where it sends, you can send like Morse code and different rhythmic flashes. And
Hmm.
so at the time I was still a TA at University of Illinois. I had the lights off in my little office, paper over the window, and then I was just in the dark with my violin, and just nailing it with the different impulses and then playing against that, and that was sort of a generating point for some of the ideas.
Hmm. And apart from this, any other practices in composition that you would like to point out and are relevant for anyone that is might be listening to this conversation in the future, and in especially in terms of shedding light and insight into your composition?
Sure. I guess one thing is that I'm thinking more about the body and time and timbre more than thinking about pitch and rhythm initially. That's
Hmm.
probably what drew me to Aaron's music more than all the specifics of it initially. The fact that like it was really centered on something that was not this more normative centering. Um, I guess that's part of it. Um, I guess one small element, I'll try to come with a bigger one in a moment, but a smaller element is um, I have this perception, and I'm not trying to throw anyone, under the bus here, but I feel like because of like the job situation in the US and and a lot of really heavy stuff going on in everyone's lives, it kind of feels like sometimes when people graduate from like usually like from a doctorate or something, their practice kind of freezes.
Hmm.
And something I've been trying to challenge myself to do is to keep myself fresh in some way. It doesn't always work, but it's something that I've been trying to value and to allow myself to either reach back to things I've let go of as I've had to try to survive, or to explore something new and so on, but to not just, well, now that I have the doctorate, it's just this each time, you know? So that's sort of a small thing that I hope that maybe in a few years I'll just feel so comfortable in this, nobody's watching me because I'm a doctor now space that I can just be and not have to just feel like I have to please anybody, you know? Um, I guess in terms of other things, I love engaging with new or different instruments. Um, my a lot of the works I was doing about a decade ago when I was at Mills College wound up being for Utterbot, which is an instrument that Jacob Barton invented and plays. It's a fully chromatic wind instrument. It's essentially a bottle with the bottom knocked off and a kitchen glove attached to it. You fill it with water and you squeeze it, and Jacob can play the heck out of that. And so we did a bunch of pieces in both very confined tuning and very broad, like more open tuning things, and that was really lovely. So being open to different things. Um, One of the most happiest experiences I've ever had is I got to write for Harry Partch's adapted viola,
Hmm.
and having to learn how that works, how the players like to interact with the instrument, and that was also a spot where a recurring interest in songwriting and improvisation comes in, because the way that Chuck Corey has Luke Fitzpatrick, the person who plays the adapted viola, do it, is he has him sing and play the adapted. It's actually this way, the adapted viola at the same time, and so just find different ways to sing and play myself. I was trying to imagine how to navigate that while imagining what goes on with this unique instrument, you know?
Um, to take us slightly back, you mentioned body and time, and I thought, I know it's very clear to you, but could you speak more about what does that mean in the framework, in the context of your work?
Sure. So I guess in terms of the body, there is that sense of, like, for example, in Aaron Cass's music and people who do music similar to Aaron's, like Tim McCormack, who I went to school with and has been a really inspiring person back in the day. Um, um, uh, uh, in that case, it's a more of a more of a tablature uh, situation where you see the hands move, where you see where the hands go, or the way that the decoupling kind of deals with it. Um, in the case of in my case, it's maybe some elements of that, but it's also thinking about the general stress level and what we're asking of somebody. So, for example, in that cello solo, um, "Can't Take You Anywhere," the I'm not constantly pushing, but I am looking for places to kind of move things into a more performative posture. In contrast, there's a French hornist I work with. Her name is Anna Marshall, and long story short, she just loves a good hangout. And as much as she's down to play a really tough horn part, um, she also she also really likes to have a really relaxed time. And so, um, in this case, we did this piece where she's using an environmental drone, whether it's an object in a room or a naturally occurring one, and she'll center the tonal center of it on that drone, and then do this memorized piece with it. And while we haven't seen it fully realized and how I'd like to see it done in sort of a almost like a road trip where Anna keeps on encountering different things and does it with different things and performs with these different sources. But the values of this is a relaxed situation. We're not going to stress about it. We're going to use these similar memorized cells to work our way through, and let that comfort zone uh, kind of help ballast the music, you know? So things like that. And in terms of time, just in terms of time management, where things go in time, is this a piece where everything is really focused? Is this a piece where everything is very gently diffused? Or can we be playful in those spaces? What happens when we push against things and expectations and so on? Also, I'd like to just quickly just point out, I believe that it's now T. McCormack, and I haven't spoken with them recently. I believe that they updated their name and their pronouns, so I just want to be respectful of that. I realized I had potentially misspoken, and I wanted to just make sure that I mentioned that. It's sometimes tough when, you've known someone for like 2 decades, you haven't really spoken in like eight, but like, but still trying to be as thoughtful as I can be.
Further to the legacy of composition, I mean, do you think about where you place your compositional practice in the total of what's existing, in a sense of um, where you I guess it's already clear from what you mentioned in terms of work on uh, Mr. Cassidy's string quartet, and further from that, where do you see your composition, if anywhere, having roots, um, in terms of what has happened before you? In And you can answer this broadly as you
Sure.
see fit.
No, totally. So I guess one thing that I guess is sort of kind of always floating around is I have a strong interest in the sort of the general history of experimental music,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
this sort of comes back to why I don't want to be just replicating it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but for example, I was over at Mills College
Is it
for a
still
hand.
experimental if it's replicated?
I mean, I think that you're allowed to do more than one experiment, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I think that the idea of saying only this is experimental is the issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also the fact that people haven't seen half of the stuff, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, before I continue, just a great recommendation really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Carolyn Brown, ex-wife of Earl Brown, wrote a really cool memoir, and um, it's such a rip because you know, she's a dancer for Merce Cunningham, so it's all these cool insights about working with Merce Cunningham. But they've also got these great anecdotes where you know they're in New York and they've got to go between their friend group to figure out who's got the car that can handle leaving New York City to go to Jersey. And then it turns out it's the premiere for 433, you know, but these lovely mundane things in the history of, you know, experimental. But yeah, I mean, I think that accidentally doing the same experiment is sometimes a necessary thing on the way to better experiments.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I will say I loved my time at Mills College, but certainly there was someone each semester who decided that sine tones equal purity, and that they just did that, and that was their thing until they realized someone else had already kind of done that bit, you know, and that's okay. Um, and you know, it's also that even now, even with fantastic books like Jenny Gottschalk's experimental music since 1970, there's often not a lot of conversation or awareness of what someone's doing or what makes them special, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
So, um, I guess that's an ongoing passion of mine that inspires me uh, because I don't want to be like the person that I'm necessarily looking up or getting to know, but maybe there's something that I can learn from them or something that's worth celebrating. Right now, I've been doing some talks about the music of Wendy Reed, who's a former teacher of mine. I just did a presentation at Explorations in Sound and New Media Art Conference in Portugal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Wendy does this beautiful music. It's very sensitive and timbral and focused. And bird sounds, environmental sounds are very important to it. And now she'll actually perform with her bird, Lulu. And so it's this lovely little team up that's been going on and this 5 decade practice where people have been working with her for like 5 years, you know, I'm sorry, for 5 decades, I'm sorry. And the idea that, you know, someone could be developing something so sensitive and specific and not be trying to publicize it super hard and just be doing this beautiful thing, you know, is just really lovely. I really recommend check out her music. They're all called tree pieces. She has a great website that you can find. Um,
And and
but yeah,
oh, sorry, pardon. Yeah,
well, yeah,
please.
but just just for example, in terms of things that inspire me. Certainly, folks like Christian Wolff, definitely his work really speaks to me. Paul Oliveros means a tremendous amount to me. I got to meet her about a decade ago, and that was wonderful. I'm really taken by what these experimentalists do as they go into different phases. Pauline kept on changing, which is very interesting. Um, uh, in terms of other influences, I guess I would say that there's a decent amount of songwriters that are of interest to me. Phil Ochs is of interest to me. Um, I love Tom Paxton. I got to thank him one time. I got to see him in performance and thank him. Uh, Peter Adriance's music means a lot to me, and it's sort of been the push and pull sometimes in my creative process where I'm like, well, I love how sensitive that music is. How about more of that? Um, uh, of course, Lachenmann means a lot. I think, unfortunately, I fell in love with that music and then was on the West Coast where nobody was dealing with him much. And then when I came back to the rest of the US about 6 years later, everyone's like they've had their Lachenmann phase or whatever. And it's kind of a shame to treat someone who's that interesting that way. But if we say it's more of a slow burn appreciation for him rather than a I like the sounds, thank you appreciation, you know. I love the music of Saunders of Rebecca Saunders. Um, More recently, I love speaking of people named Rebecca. Uh, uh, Rebecca Gray is a really exciting composer, singer, violinist based in Canada. She has this amazing video opera named Jess. I think it's awesome. I think it's a great testament to what a person can do when they know themselves. Um, because it's exactly what someone can just rock and roll on with her skill set. And then she has this amazing sister who does all the visuals for it. I loved showing that to my students during this last semester, and we're hoping to have her be a visitor on Zoom.
And further, we are slowly reaching the conclusion, but before that, maybe some currents, if you already didn't address most of that, and future uh, plans in composition. Where do you see um, your compositional work going in the future, near, far?
Thank you. I, I guess for anyone who's tuning in and watching this later, and they're maybe in hearing me talk or checking out my music more, hopefully more likely, if people would like to reach out and engage about projects, I would love that. I'm currently looking for some people to team up on a few new versions of DuoTube, as well as I'm looking for a, uh, a European-based cellist to team up with on a few things. So just a couple different ideas there that I'm sort of slowly developing. But right now, I'm working with a violinist named Si Chen. We have a solo called Lines Around the Corner. It's been getting into a fair amount of things right now, and we're looking to present that at a bunch of conferences in the coming months, as well as Briar Darling, who I mentioned earlier, will be playing my solo up at Roosevelt University for College Music Society Great Lakes, something like I think March 7th or March 8th. Um, in terms of and the paper talk about Wendy has been of interest to folks, so I'll be presenting that at the Penn State New Music Festival and Symposium. And if you haven't been to that one, that one's just a stellar time. Baljinder Sekhan is honestly a national treasure. So definitely take some time and check him out. I'll say this on the record happily. I think he's one of the most exciting teachers of composition in the U.S. And I think that one of his superpowers is that he really cares. Like he cares about you when you're in the lesson room, and he cares about you when you're in public spaces. In the U.S., sometimes you only get one of those. Very, very special person. Um, and what else? I so Freya played the cello solo in Sydney for Australasian Computer Music Conference a while back, about a month ago. Duotube had its Italian premiere at Audio Mostly. That was fun. Um, I got to celebrate Johnny Reinhardt, the bassoonist, raconteur, microtonal maven, as part of the Ecmelic Society's conference in New York City, and hoping to do more on that eventually. If you haven't spent time with Johnny, I'm not trying to like constantly reference people, but Johnny Reinhardt, for example, is one of those like amazing, quirky American experimentalists that like doesn't really fit one category. But then when you look at him, there's so many cool things that he does that like is so inspiring. And the fact that he documented everything for several decades is awesome, you
Mm-hmm.
know. But uh, with All Score, we're going to do the concert in a few months. So people are working on their pieces still. So we're talking with our community partners. IMC, which is the Independent Media Center, hosted all of the workshops, and Rose Bowl Tavern is where we're going to have the show. And the city of Urbana's arts and that arts the arts and culture grant is how we're able to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Beyond that, I'm dreaming up this ensemble piece right now and trying to take my love of James Tenney and both love it and twist it and move things around. I find James Tenney really, really fascinating, and he's on my mind, and so is Larry Polanski. So it's just been a sort of a how do I acknowledge and appreciate and not replicate?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, in terms of, let's say, regardless of the um, performances, strictly compositionally, what would you say for that? Where do you want, what is important for you to achieve in terms of that?
Oh, I'm
Also for
sorry.
the future.
I'm sorry. Could I didn't quite follow the question. Would you mind
Yeah,
asking
yeah,
again?
of course. I wanted to ask you strictly compositionally speaking, regardless of the uh, performances and realizations, um, is there also something that you have as a goal that you want to achieve in your work of composition in the future?
Sure. Yeah, there are a couple places I want to go. I definitely want to keep on moving into these different creative spaces where, um, whether it's text as written language or text in other means, is um, a part of either the process or the realized work. I really want to continue to delve further into um, writing things that are site specific in some way, in terms of like loving a certain sound of a space. There's this bridge in town that I really need to write a piece for. It has this loud metal hand guards
Mm-hmm.
that, and one is cut at a different length, so it sounds so much more different than the others. So I really want to play with that. But in terms of next steps, um, I, 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 I guess there are pieces I need to write. I need to write a piece for Peter Tiarina, who I mentioned earlier. I really want to work with performers who have that improvisation background more and more and invest in that in different ways. I want to explore that because Peter's down for a variety of things, but his background is in jazz. He just got his doctorate and is doing all the stuff about historical trombone and stuff. Um, I definitely want to keep on building pieces that can persist even when there isn't a lot of support for, like hiring an ensemble or this or that. Um, I definitely want to complete some series of things, Duotube, continuing to write pieces for that series. Um, yeah, there are some other ones, but generally speaking, meeting the specific quirks and curiosities of a collaborator especially excites me. So there are things like that I'm looking forward to taking on. And honestly, now that I'm more in touch with Millikin's radio folks, more radio work again too.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Um, and looking forward to seeing and hearing any of these. Since now we are concluding the conversation, I would only ask you for two brief messages. One for any aspiring composers that might hear this conversation, and the other one for anyone that will go and listen to your music after this.
sure. I guess for any composer, whether we're starting or continuing, I guess two things. One thing is if you want people to play your music and come to your shows and all that, you need to go to other people's things too. And it's a very boring piece of advice, and it's something we're all imperfect at, but actually showing up really does seem to matter a lot for folks. Uh, and it's a great way to celebrate folks. Sometimes in the US, people get so busy that they don't go to each other's stuff, and then they go, why don't people come to my things? And it's because you haven't gone to anyone else's, you know? Um, and I guess the other thing is, I guess I'm less concerned about the starting right now as much as the how we continue to compose. I think that's something that needs to be discussed more because life gets hard. Chronic illness is something that, with all score, we're finding that the folks we work with tend to have some element of chronic illness sometimes, or a big life tragedy will shut down creativity or access for a while. And so the how we continue is I think some questions. So part of that is thinking about what support systems are available in terms of your area, online, what organizations might be useful and thoughtful for that. Um, Thinking about what in your practice you can do now. I was watching your interview with Ben
Mm-hmm.
from a few days ago, and I think his advice was just go compose, and that's great. And I would add to that the idea of having the little pieces that you can accomplish quickly and the big dream pieces that you want to work on. Like I want to do some small postcard pieces a la James Tenney for this concert I was mentioning earlier. But what I also want to do is convince my friend Brad to actually work on the libretto for this wacky opera that we've been talking about for a while. But that's going to take a lot of root beers and a lot of time, but hopefully we'll get there. Um, so yeah, I would say that those are the things, and I think that it's okay to take breaks. It's okay to have fallow periods, and it's okay to try different modes of creativity. It's okay to team up, have a duo, have a collective, do things off the cuff. Um, just being getting to be creative and loving yourself, I think, is really important. One of the most special things I heard about with Herbert Brune, he had a student that was having a lot of trouble composing, and they're like, I just can't do it right now. And he said to them, and this is boomer America, so this is not big feelings territory. This is like macho man time. So that someone's saying this in the macho man time, I think is great. That it's okay. You can be a sound investigator. Go investigate things. Go explore. Write about what you hear. Ask yourself questions. I love that idea of being flexible and not stressing yourself out about it. And I know that wasn't particularly short, but it's unfortunately asking something about that I really, 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 really care about. Yeah, in terms of listening to my stuff, my website is ralphlewismusic.com. Uh, a lot has been put on SoundCloud. Uh, I've had more audiovisual work in the last 4 or 5 years, so that winds up going on YouTube more. My website's a decent place to find most of it. And if folks are having trouble finding stuff, reaching out to me through the website is absolutely fine.
Thank you. I hope you get responses to that. And thank you for sharing.
Thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with me.
Likewise.